Hi everyone. So first you have three main categories of people. They are white hat hackers, grey hat hackers and black hat hackers. Everything that we will be doing falls into this category here. So white hats, those are people whose activities are within the confines of the law. There are people such as pen testers, ethical hackers, people like you and me and so on. Then you have grey hat hackers whose activities are bordering between legal and illegal. It's a bit of shady area there. In addition to that, you have the most known category, which is black hat hackers. And usually and unfortunately, every time somebody hears the term hacking, it is associated with people from black hat world. There are people who conducted all sort of illegal activities or conduct activities without any regard for the law, and I don't know, extract information from certain servers. Credentials, your credit card information, take service down, usually to extract some sort of financial gain. In any case, down below you have footprinting. Now the active footprinting is basically information gathering. You are with your conduct in some sort of accordance work. You are figuring out the IP of the server, figuring out which ports are open, and without you can conclude which services are running there. But it doesn't really need to be confined to the digital world. The active footprinting can also be when you go to the company itself. You just walk in, doesn't necessarily need to be accompanied, can be pretty much any building with a service in it, and you have a look around. You try to gather some information there on site where you go and you addicted their trash cans. So behind the building, jump into those trash containers and get some information from there. Also, people have known to you onto parking lots to see who the employees are, who works there, all sorts of things. So this is just general information gathering in regards to your chosen target. It doesn't need to be confined to the digital world anyway down below. You have certain types of attacks. You have DOS and DDoS. Very simple, because the same thing implemented in the different ways. DOS stands for denial of services, usually called child in attack because they have relatively easy to implement and they still are provided. Of course, you have enough machines, but that's the domain in the DDoS. In general, what happens here is that you perform a certain amount of requests, more requests than a server can handle, and then server begins dropping connections. For example, Apache web service, I believe by default it can handle up to 10,000 connections or so, and if you can't make more than 10,000 requests, basically everybody else make any sort of request will not be able to access the website because their connections will be dropped simply because Apache will say, okay, I have too many users, I have more users than I can handle. All the other connections will be dropped by default, thereby making the site inaccessible. Even though you haven't really broken any codes, you haven't really broken through any firewalls or stolen passwords or anything of a kind, but when you're doing something, it's just you. So all the connection, all the requests, everything is coming just from your own computer, and that's not always the most efficient of ways. In fact, it generally can only work if there is a flaw in the way in which requests are processed. However, that is why you have DDoS attacks when you have multiple computers, multiple connections, and they are all making stimulus requests to a certain server, and this is really difficult to fight off. I mean, you really need to have a clear configuration of your firewall, and you need to have quite a good firewall as well. Usually we would need a physical one to prevent the sort of DDoS attacks. By physical, I mean a relative firewall or something of a kind. This is quite difficult too. It's not difficult to actually do the attack itself, as it is difficult to make the necessary preparations. First of all, you need to go through infecting other devices, which we will use, which you will enslave and use in order to perform this sort of an attack. This is the hard part. The DDoS part is quite easy compared to that. For that, in order for you to infect other computers, you need to do things. You need RATs, remote administration tools, and you need to move and you need to make the FUD. You need to make them fully undetectable. That is what the term full stands for. That just means that they cannot be detected by antivirus or a day, or more precisely, it would be that they are not labeled as something malicious by antivirus programs. And by the way, sometimes, actually most of the time, most of it, you don't actually need to make your own applications fully undetectable. There are plenty of pen testing companies out there, and I just been testing companies, but other companies as well, who will pay a very good sums of money if you can make their program fully undetectable by antivirus programs down below. The RATS remote administration tool, and now they themselves are not some sort of hacks or anything of a kind. They just basically put them on a USB stick or something of a kind. Send them in the mail, send them in a zip sure file, and in such a way that they are just one of the ways to infect other computers, other devices, and enslave them, convert them into your slaves, into the slaves of the main server, wherever that might be, wherever you might set it up, and then you can use all of those computers to conduct all sorts of activity. This is very good because it's anonymous to you to have a large extent. It's very difficult to track you. It's very difficult to track you down, whoever is doing this, primarily because the users who are infected, they have no idea that somebody else is controlling the devices, because nothing is really happening on your desktop. You can't really see all the process are being run in the background, and your process is executing them using other way to see it. Would be basically to start UPC task manager or something of a kind, and then see the running process in. Perhaps you could spot there, but not even there, if somebody has implemented a rootkit. So a rootkit is a tool basically which you install onto an operating system, and it is able to hide running process from the system itself. So when you, are example, start a task manager in Windows or something of a kind, the purpose of rootkit would be to hide the process from the task manager. Basically how it works is that task manager requests information from the system, from the kernel, and then the kernel of the system responses, which is the core of the system, where all the drivers have key functionalities are. The kernel, the system in response, hey, I have this, and this process running, here you go. But what rootkit would do is redirect those requests from task manager to itself, and would basically say, I don't have such processes running. So very, very dangerous and potent combination here that we will use later on as we progress through this tutorial. But for the time being, I just wanted to give a bit of an introduction to it and give you an idea of what we shall be doing through some of their basic terms and concepts. Next time we have phishing attacks. Now phishing attacks are basically when you apply some sort of bait, somebody bites, and it then pull you down to it, simple as right as the same way you do phishing. Well, not quite. Phishing attacks would be when you get us an email from someone and there's a link in it, you click on it and it throws you somewhere, I don't know, on some website. It perhaps looks like something legit, that perhaps look like a website that you are using with something of a kind, but it is not a new passenger credentials, and that can be a problem, but this is generally avoided. Today, this is not something that happens in such a way. Rather, instead what happens these days is that the DNS servers get changed on your routers, and once that happens, all the requests that you make on your web browsers get redirected. So for example, if you type in facebook.com, you're going to get it to me in with facebook.com. From some private DNS server, God knows whose Amex records are altered, and they had been configured, for example, to make redirections to interpret. Sorry, not redirections, but rather instead of interpret facebook.com to a certain IP address that does not belong to Facebook or anything like that. So you open your Facebook, it looks exactly the same. There is no way to tell, because in the upper left corner of the screen you have the domain name written in www.facebook.com, and basically providing login credentials. Once you do that, they are gone. Somebody has that one of the ways to detect this, even though it's not hard, but nobody really pays any attention to it. In the upper left corner, you might check with the protocol in HTTPS instead of HTTPC3. Usually these kinds of attacks are conducted. It's not going to be HTTPS, or there is a lot harder to implement, but if it is HTTPS, there really wouldn't be any legged way of figuring it out other than actually checking the key, checking the certificates, and nobody actually does that. I mean, well, maybe nobody, but 90%, 99% of the users out there are not going to bother to go about conducting such checks. Anyway, I know it sounds a bit complex, but believe me, I will explain this in great details. I will give you several demonstrations, and by the end of this course, you will understand and know how to do this with great ease. It will not present a significant obstacle in your line of work. Excellent. Now, what we have approximately have these done.